Hello, 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 everyone. I am Tarina Ali, the host of Suds Cafe, and I am excited to have our very first episode. And I have an amazing, amazing, amazing guest, and I'm glad to have him here. People do not have to agree to do anything for you, and so I do not take that for granted at all. And I met him. First of all, let me just allow him to introduce himself. And so we'll start there. And so, my wonderful, esteemed, yes, Sam, my brother, please introduce yourself to my audience.
Hi, Tari. It's a big privilege to be on your podcast, and I'm humbled to be the first guest. It is a big thing. Thank you. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really excited to be here all the way from the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, in Nigeria, and that's in West Africa. My name is Sam Obafemi. I'm called the Octopus, and my preoccupation really is to help people solve their problems or challenges or achieve their aspirations. And mostly I like to attend to business owners. So I like to call them my constituency, visionaries, founders, board members, C-suite executives. They're the people that I'm most passionate about. And of course, I also like to see people achieve personal peace and make progress with their lives. So maybe that's why I'm the octopus, get to put my hands in a lot of spaces. Well, hey, Tarina, it's good to connect with you again. It's been many years. We're counting our friendship now in years, almost a decade, like we say, play here. It's so good to be here on your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. And definitely the time of connection. And we also have the same birthday. So isn't
My
that?
birthday mate.
Yes. So that's even more super cool.
Honestly, that
Oh,
was a beautiful coincidence.
yes, right. A beautiful coincidence that we could
Yes,
not have definitely planned.
yes.
To this topic, we're going to talk about today the power of vulnerability. And I thought you would be the most perfect person to come to have that conversation because there are many misnomers and different things around vulnerability, in
Mm.
particular with men, but vulnerability anyone could be vulnerable, right? And so
Yes,
we're going to talk
yes.
about that and have a really riveting conversation. And so we're just going to get right to it. And so I'm just curious your thoughts of how can embracing vulnerability lead to personal growth and stronger relationships, in your opinion?
Fantastic. I think that to start with, many of us were raised wrongly.
Mhm.
And I'd like to say, maybe or maybe not, especially men, we were raised to think that, hey, you can handle it. Hey, you can suck it up. It looks like when you try to be human, you're trying to be weak, or more like a wimp. So vulnerability for me, and I'm grateful to God for helping me and reclaim myself, because I'll tell you for a fact, if I went by how my mom raised me, I was raised by my dad and my mom, but my mom was more about you standing up and showing up and not trying to be weak and not trying to be slow. I remember when I was growing up, when I took ill, my mom used to be upset. It felt like it was a crime to be sick, and
I think you may have.
I couldn't understand why. Coming from that background, I'm happy that at some point I had to reclaim
Sam, I think you're freezing up a little bit on your end. You're frozen on my side.
my life and decided that I'm just going to date with the fact that while I'm not glorifying my flaws, I have flaws.
Yeah,
While I'm, yes, while I'm not going to be proud and brag like, well, I've got flaws, deal with it, I can't do anything about it. It's good to associate with just who you are as a person, first and foremost. And you see, it has a great goodwill that comes with it, because people who are struggling, when they see a vulnerable person, there is just that resonance. There is a connection and says, yeah, this guy, now this is what we're talking about. So it attracts people to you who are seeking direction, who are seeking help, and they find in you someone who is not claiming to be perfect, who doesn't need to claim to be perfect, and who just is comfortable in his skin, being working it out. One of the things I'm very sure I have demonstrated over the years is I'm always showing people that I am working out my flaws. And more people appreciate that. And so I'm grateful that I followed this path of vulnerability. I don't take credit for it, but I'm happy that I was able to follow that path, because honestly, it deepens relationships with people. The biggest thing is that people connect with you at the level where they are struggling. And they're able to appreciate that, oh, if you made it out of this rut, then I can make it out of this rut. It becomes like you're like a beacon, a ray of hope, a light that says, if this guy can come out of this problem and talk about it as though it didn't happen, then I think it's just in a matter of time, I would also come out of this problem and I'll be fine. So it's such a very powerful experience. It's a very powerful experience.
And I'm glad so many nuggets that you're just sharing already is that vulnerability is definitely a strength, and it can connect people to you. As you mentioned, a lot of times people see vulnerability as a form of weakness, but it takes a lot of strength,
It
what I
does.
believe in, to bear your soul. And this is just the point of this podcast, Suds Cafe, is just to have conversations like this, just to bubble over into your soul, right? Because we need this level of conversation, I believe, across the world.
Yes.
Because I
Yes.
was raised similarly. Even though I am a woman, my mother still, I was raised with my parents. They had divorced, but I was still raised to be strong, to be tough. And vulnerability definitely was not viewed as a strength. And similarly, as you mentioned, if I was sick, my mom would say, drink a soda pop, or here in the United States, drink some ginger ale soda or whatever. Still need to get up and dare not lay around. It's like, what are you doing? Why are you laying around? Like everything was to push through. So I
I can
definitely
imagine.
fully understand that premise of, sometimes our parents, I say, did the best that they could with the best
Yes.
information that they had at
Yes.
that point in
Yes.
time,
Yes.
right? And so
Yes.
if we begin to know better, I believe that we should definitely do better,
Okay.
as a culture of people. And I inherently believe that there are definitely some psychological, emotional benefits of being vulnerable, which you had started talking about that a little bit. But can you expand on that a little bit more? Like, what are the psychological here, and then in that heart space, the emotional benefits from being vulnerable?
Fantastic. So firstly, psychological, when you're vulnerable, even you feel safe with yourself. You're not trying to remember what you said or trying to remember how you were or how you acted. This is me. So first, there's safety, there is acceptance. Psychologically, there is also, affirmation. Because the way the mind works is when you embrace your realities, your mind gets into, how do I solve this problem? So there is also affirmation. It's a positive way of saying, okay, here I am. I need to come out of this, and this is who I am. So psychologically, there is safety. Psychologically, there is affirmation. There is strength, because automatically your brain gets into solution mode. Emotionally, there is confidence. There's confidence that, especially when you're true to yourself, you've connected with yourself, there's confidence that this is who I am. Emotionally, especially when you begin to see the results of being vulnerable, there is positivity, enthusiasm. So when people are talking about grit and resilience, there's a direct relationship between vulnerability and resilience. You cannot be resilient about what you resist. You can be resilient about the things you've accepted, that this is my current situation and I'm going to go through it. When they say walking through the valley of the shadow of death, it's first accepting that I'm in the valley of the shadow of death. Then I know that I want to go up on the hill above the valley. That's where resilience comes from. So emotionally, there is enthusiasm that is coming from the motivation that I know I'm down, or I know I'm falling, or I know I'm stressed, or I know I'm going through a patch, but hey, you know what? We're going to do this. So enthusiasm. And when there's enthusiasm, there is hope. So at the emotional level, there is hope. There is hope that I may not know when it will come out or when it will end. It may be 1 week, it may be 1 year, it may be 10 years, but I'm going to come out of this, And then emotionally, there is the vulnerability or the openness to support systems. Because a vulnerable person knows that other vulnerable people will come through for him or her. So there is community, there is friendship, there is openness for help. There is the approaching life from the context of, I'm not doing this alone. I'm going to go with the committee of people that are drawn to my vulnerability. So you see, it's a two-way traffic. Psychologically, you're strengthened. Emotionally, you're motivated. And then time just passes. And you just come out and you're like, oh, wow, we actually did it.
Where do I begin with all these gems that you're dropping? It's like, take us to church, Coach Sam, walking through the valley of the shadow. But that's really what happens in real life, right? Like some people, you talked about, being safe within oneself, right? And so many people do not honestly have that emotional safety within self, yet alone for somebody else. And so you're definitely giving people tips and strategies of saying, hey, it starts here, but let's build this community of people so that you don't have to feel that you need to do this alone, because there are definitely strengths in being vulnerable in communities. And it's actually, like I said, it attracts people, because it's like, hey, if this person can share their scars or share their pain, then hey, I can have the courage to do the same within those comfort levels, right? Like everything isn't for everybody. However, it should be for some people, right? Like we're not put in this world, I believe, just to be an island entirely unto ourselves. Like the community to help us navigate some of those hard spaces, and vulnerability, I believe, is that fuel in your engine to help you actually to do that, right? It is actually that strength to help to do that. And so we start talking about community and all those things, but let's talk about a little bit more like, how can vulnerability foster empathy, connection and intimacy in our lives? And so of course, intimacy goes beyond just something where they talk about a physical thing with people, right? But how can this vulnerability, this great big old V, foster empathy and connection and just real life intimacy in our lives with other people?
So one big lesson that vulnerability teaches anyone is that someone may not be struggling where I'm struggling, but someone is struggling. If I'm struggling in this area, other people may not have the same struggle, but they're definitely struggling with something. And that simple way of thinking just makes you have grace. Just the grace that I can't even judge you because I know that I'm going through stuff. So it's not in my place to say, hey, you're wrong. Hey, you're messing up. Hey, you're not going to, like, the approach to life changes. You're more accommodating. You're not enabling, but you're understanding. You're not tolerating, but you're not despising. So there is grace, there is protection, there is cover. And what that does is when people heal, the memories of grace makes people bond. That's the thing. Because my sister, many of us have gone through a rough patch. And when we remember who was there, you just feel a sense of loyalty, a sense of reciprocity, a sense of gratitude towards those people. But people who you thought should have been more considerate or more empathetic, when they've been very hostile, then even in your kindest heart, you're struggling to be, because suddenly safety is lost. You're like, I don't feel safe with this person. I can't trust this person. The person may not have offended me, but when I was going through a rough patch, this person was not kind to me. So the thing about vulnerability is that we have a shared sense of grace. And that shared sense of grace creates a memory that builds bonding.
Yeah.
And that's why many of us are still benefiting from the grace of our parents. We meet people who say, oh, you're the son of this person. Oh, you're the daughter of so person. Oh, your mom was so kind to me. We were not even probably alive when that person was going through a patch.
Yeah.
But that help from our parents in their lives has extended to us. We are just beneficiaries of grace from bonding.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about vulnerability. It is a natural empathetic vehicle when we accept that if I'm suffering from something, someone else is suffering from something else, and we exchange grace.
Grace. Oh, that really touched my heart. I said, no, I'm not gonna be on this podcast sharing tears already. But that really, really, really touched me because we have to remember that everybody has their own personal struggles
Yes.
that we may know nothing about, and it's just that we do have to show a level of grace to help people navigate those spaces, because it's hard out here. It's hard to, I don't know what all these things are popping up. It's hard to sometimes connect because we do feel that we're the only ones that are experiencing whatever that we are experiencing. And that's just not true. Just because people aren't always letting you know what their struggles are, they have them. They have them. They have them. And we must show grace to people because we will need that same measure of grace for anything that is going on in our space. And of course, anytime you're attempting to do something, people want to call you. Something's ringing on my end.
I can
So
imagine.
we want to call you for something, but this is a very riveting conversation that we're actually having. And my hope and prayer is that it resonates with people in the days and the weeks, and the months to come, because sometimes things don't automatically click when we hear it, right? But the power of the internet and things of that nature, someone may be scrolling through this and hear it and see it, and some of those things that really jump out at them. And that is just my hope and prayer. But there's some roadblocks that people inherently have when they start talking about vulnerability. There's some like common fears and misconceptions that hold people back. And can you just share a little bit of, and just your experience and your thoughts, like what are some common fears and misconceptions that literally hold people back?
This is a very good question, because I don't want to take for granted that the fact that I've learned to be vulnerable, and because God has helped me to be able to be vulnerable, that everybody can achieve it. And that would be too simplistic to think. I also remember that sometime around 2016, 2017, I almost lost this capacity to be vulnerable because I had opened up to some very intimate people. There was a particular guy who used to be like a mentor to me, like someone I looked up to. And I remember opening up to him on challenges I was having with my marriage and some relationships. And he went discussing me with his clique of proteges who were juniors to me in the industry. And the disrespect was so much, and it was a struggle for me. But because I have just come, somehow I just have a way of bouncing back, and I really don't want to take that for granted. So yes, some challenges that limit some people from being vulnerable. Number one is the fear that the information I share can become a weapon that people can use against me. Is a very big fear. I get people tell me that a lot. People come to me and say, I like how you're courageous. I like your fearlessness. Can you tell me what I can do to do like what you've done? And one constant feedback is, what if somebody uses what I tell them against me?
Yeah.
I get that a lot.
Yeah.
So that is number one. Number two, some people don't know this limit or the scope of what we mean by being vulnerable. So, for example, vulnerability may mean taking your life back, but does not mean destroying someone else's life.
At all, it doesn't. Mm-mm.
So some people want to be vulnerable, then they start mentioning names and accounts of people and places and situations. Now, that's not being vulnerable. That is, I don't know what to call that. That may be journalism or something. So the second challenge people have with being vulnerable is, okay, what do I share and what don't I share? What's the extent of what I can share and in what way can I put it? Because I just want to be liberated.
Mhm.
But they are also afraid that in trying to be liberated, they are more like going to be dragging other people into their issues, and they don't want that drama.
Mhm.
So that's the second limitation. The third limitation is the fact that vulnerability comes with its own backlash.
Mhm.
It also comes with new levels of pressure.
Yeah.
I remember this last 3 weeks or so since I've been sharing wedding pictures.
Mhm.
Many people who did not know I was divorced, who are just knowing for the first time, it was, oh my God, what's going on?
Yeah.
And then those that knew were asking questions. I got messages, emails. Everybody
Yeah.
was like, oh,
Yeah.
motivated. I'm inspired somewhere. Like, what's going on? What happened? Why? Oh my God, it was overwhelming. I was like, okay. I told my wife, I said, at a point, I started feeling, what even made you post all this? Like, it was so overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah.
So some people don't have the energy
Yeah.
for what happens after being vulnerable. Like, you know what? I don't even have the strength for what is coming. So let me just leave it. So
Mhm.
these are some of the very salient or very strong reasons why people just prefer
Yeah.
to just lock up
Mhm.
and not be vulnerable,
Yeah.
really. And the one last point I should add is the fear of embarrassing our families.
Mm. Mhm.
I will tell you for a fact, my family is already used to this. I remember when I started this journey 2012, 2013, when I started writing about my stories and documenting, my parents were very uncomfortable. My younger brothers were very uncomfortable. But I think over time, they just saw that that's just this guy. Let's just leave him alone. So, because
Yeah. Yeah.
I've seen some people who write posts and they come back and say, I had to take it down because my mom called me to take it down. My family says I should take it down.
Mhm.
I don't have that experience.
Yeah.
It's my
Yeah.
family don't tell me to take things
Take
down.
it down.
I
Yeah.
think they're just used to the fact that this guy, that is what works for him and
Mhm.
it's fine.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think these are the things I can relate with in terms of limitations that
Mhm.
make people not want to be vulnerable.
Yeah, and those are very definitely poignant points and real life things for people. And so we're definitely not saying that it's always easy, that there may not be
Yes.
backlash, because everyone isn't at that place to want
Yes.
to do that. And we're all uniquely different, right? But we have to
Yes.
walk in our own path. And something I say, and I wholeheartedly believe by, that people will be okay, right? And if
Yes.
they're not, then
Absolutely.
so be it. They'll be fine.
Absolutely. I believe
They'll
that
be fine.
wholeheartedly.
They'll be fine, right? And so it's
It'll be
it's
fine.
less about the person, it's more about you, what it is doing
Yes.
for you. And if so happen people connect with your potential sharing, then that's a blessing, for them.
Yes.
But I definitely believe that we are in this earth to have experiences, to have struggles, and not to share to help someone coming along. Like, what's the purpose of this all, right? I
Yes.
believe that definitely Christ led that model. You know what I
Yes.
mean? He bore his scars for us to be able to do that. And so, yeah, there
Yes.
are definitely inherent risks, but there are inherent risks in doing anything, right? We don't know what's going
Everything.
to happen
Absolutely.
in the
Yes.
world. We pray for protection and all those things, but there are risks everywhere. And so I tell
I'm
people
telling
all the
you.
time, there are risks at all. You're interested in pursuing someone and you want to ask them on a date, it's a risk. They may say no,
There
but guess
is.
what? Do you stop? Do you stop and say, oh, I'm never going to ask, another person on a date? So you have to build up your resiliency, right?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
be able to do that. And so this leads into, how can someone build their courage and also their self-compassion to share in their authentic selves? Because as you mentioned, some family members or some people can just be like bullies almost,
Yes. Yes.
reprisal, all those kinds of things. And
Yes.
hopefully that people don't have that kind of um, attritions to happen to them, in a physical space. But for those who may be struggling with the courage
Yes.
to be their authentic selves, what would you encourage them in that point when they are really wanting to do that?
Awesome. Awesome. First and foremost, I think it's a journey of
Yeah.
self-awareness.
Yeah.
The first thing is whoever you think you're afraid of has grown capacity to become a force for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
People who are confident enough to challenge or to, in quote, bully or try to task you to not be vulnerable, what they are seemingly telling you is that I own you.
Mm. Mm.
I have grown capacity and authority to tell you what to do about your life.
Ah.
So for me, it's a journey of self-awareness. The person needs to first take a journey to say, I own me.
Mm-hmm.
This is who I am.
Yeah.
This is how I'm wired.
Yeah.
This is my programming.
Mm-hmm.
And first, in understanding your programming, you're able to now see the areas that are limiting your potentials and capacity. So for me, anyone listening to this podcast, you have to be interested in being a student of yourself. You have to do that. You must learn about yourself continuously with a lot of focus. It's very key. That's the first step. The second step is that you must ask yourself, to whom was I sent?
Mm.
Because actually, every human being sent to earth has an audience that God has sent them to deliver.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So in being vulnerable, and I like how you put it earlier, you need to be able to tell yourself that my entire journey was crafted because someone has to learn about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our journey in life is not primarily because of us. It is primarily because as it is happening, it is a scripture for someone.
Mm-hmm.
We're all an epistle to someone.
Yeah.
So the person needs to understand that in being vulnerable, you are liberating someone to whom you are an epistle.
Oh, yes.
Which means that some people are not called to you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's very fine.
Yeah.
Some people are called to you. Like I say in my post, since I was divorced, I lost some good friends. And I just accept the fact that it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And guess what? I've won more people over
Yeah.
just because I have been vulnerable. People who
Yes.
don't know me from anywhere.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
means that those that I'm called to, I'm giving them a line of hope.
Yeah.
And those that I'm not called to,
Yeah.
they can as well be fine wherever they are. So the listener must understand that your life message is to save someone to whom you have been sent. That's number two. Number three, the honest truth is, after all is said and done, the extent you can achieve in life is dependent on your acceptance of your vulnerability. That's just the way what life is. You have to embrace your journey enough to know that it is everything in the past that determines the future. So our future is interconnected to our past. And it is when you come to the point of being vulnerable and courageous that you can face it. So how does a person become courageous? I'll say one, anticipate resistance
Yes.
and plan for it.
Yes. And plan for it.
Instead of running away from resistance,
Yeah.
build capacity.
Yeah.
It could be a lot of podcasts you listen to. It could be a lot of YouTube channels you listen to. It could be a lot of therapy you may have to do. It may be coaching. It may be having an accountability partner. It could be belonging to having whatever works for you. You just have to brace up for it because there may or may not be backlash to your vulnerability. And number two is find a role model that you connect with. So for example, I have some key people that I follow in my life that because they do what they do, it tells me that nothing can go wrong. So I model after their courage. I model after their audacity. I model after their seeming, or they just have a fearless ambition. And I'm like, if this person can do it, then I can do it.
Yeah.
So I totally believe in mentorship. I totally believe in role modeling. I totally believe in accountability systems, but everything starts from self-awareness. You have to do the work of knowing yourself as God has made you.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So it's very key. You have to ask yourself, and I know to some people, doing personality assessment and doing all those assessments may be difficult, but if nothing, I think in just your quiet moment, asking the Holy Spirit to tell you, what did you make me for?
Mhm.
It's a
Absolutely.
very simple place to start, because then God will send into your life a relationship that will open your mind or expose you to some information
Mhm.
that will tell you about yourself. If you don't know yourself, you will lose a lot of momentum,
Yeah.
and you will go so many wrong routes, because you can't be courageous and vulnerable outside knowing who you are. It's not possible.
Yeah. I totally agree. And as we're, wrapping up, I could talk to you for hours and hours. This is just so good. And it resonates deeply with me. And I wanted to start with this particular topic because this is what this podcast is about: the human spirit and being vulnerable and understanding that we're all struggling with something as
Yes,
human beings,
yes,
and that we
yes,
all need the same level of grace. And
yes,
sometimes it's just we can become so hardened, right? I understand life can throw curveballs, life can do
yes,
all things, but life is not linear. You're going to have
yes.
hills and valleys. You're going to have highs and lows. And as you
Perfect.
talked about it, we have to expect the resistance. So
Yes,
often we don't want it, right? I was sharing with someone the other day. I said, we want to take the good, the happy, the exuberant, but life has a multiplicity of things that's going to come, right? My mom used to say, you have to learn to take the bitter and the sweet,
I
right?
tell you,
We're
the
not
same things I tell
living.
my
Yeah,
daughters a
yeah,
lot.
yeah. And so we have to be able to do that. And like you mentioned too, we all have an audience, right? And we all are a walking billboard for someone else. In
Yes,
this day and age, people get so caught up in numbers and likes and shares in this internet world or what have you, right? But if it's your design, I'm say, for example, you're working at a preschool, or a daycare center, right? Those may be your people that you're
yes,
building into. Like, we don't always have to cross pollinate into everyone's area because we all
yes,
have a sphere of influence, what I think
yes,
that we can use for the good. And as you talked about, how can people be stronger in doing this is exactly building a community, not attempting to do this by yourself. And it would be
yes,
great and wonderful if people came to coaching, maybe through you or getting a mentor or coming to me for counseling or whatever the case may be. But everybody's not going to do those things. But as you
yes,
mentioned, somebody may watch a podcast, they may read a book or follow someone on social media, but we're just encouraging you to connect with those kind of people who can help you, first of all, grow internally as
yes,
a person, right?
yes,
That's
yes,
where it starts, is like once you grow internally as a person, then you can start reaching out and being comfortable and being vulnerable to share with other people. And you'll see it's like popcorn wildflower, as you talked about when you shared. People started reaching out to you that
yes,
you did not
yes,
know. And lastly, is I heard you mention saying that you had gone through a divorce before, and so did I, right? And that happens. You'll lose friends along the way, whether divorce, new job, moving to a new country. That happens in life, right? But the world is just so big. And never
yes,
think that if you lose something that there's no room for anything else,
absolutely,
right? And if you
absolutely.
share and to be vulnerable, there are a light group of community of people who are definitely watching and looking
Yes,
and who can
yes,
benefit from what you're doing. And it's not just
yes,
one-sided. It's a give and take thing, right?
yes,
Well, a lot
yes,
of times being vulnerable, you share, and that's that release for you. You just need to get it out from you. And other people is a connection point. And so that's just the premise of this particular episode today. And I thank you for being here, Sam. Always love from you to me. I look forward to meeting
yeah.
your lovely bride and also having her on at some point to share her
Yes,
wisdom and
yes,
share her
yes.
nuggets. And so how can people connect with you on social media? Because I'm sure someone listening, like, I want to connect with him, I want to follow him. How can people connect with you?
Fantastic. I'd first say thank you for having me on this podcast. I feel so humbled
Mhm.
that I'm on the first episode, and this topic was very apt, honestly, very good topic. that something is something that many people would need
Yeah.
to maybe restart their lives, maybe just get a moral boost,
Mhm.
and a good motivation. So thank you for what you do. I really, really love you. And
Mhm.
I thank you for the friendship. You've always been there. People can reach me on Instagram, on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
Sam Obafemi is
Mhm.
the name. But maybe most importantly, my website will be faster. So samobafemi.com. And
Mhm.
I'll spell Obafemi for our friends who are not Nigerian speaking. So Sam is SAM, and then Obafemi is OB. So O for oxygen, B for Bravo, A for Alpha, F for France, E for energy or ego, M for mango, I for indigo. So that's obafemi.com, Sam Obafemi, one word.com. You would find me there, my products, my books, my resources, and then that will lead you to my social media handles. Or if you just type the octopus, Sam Obafemi, the octopus on Google, you would have a lot to read about me. I think I've done so many very rebellious stuff, so my content is all over the place.
We all have
Thank
a
you
story.
for having me.
We all have a story. Thank you so much for being here. I am your host yet again, Tarina Ali of the Suds Cafe, and this was an amazing first episode. Many more are to come. Same, you can reach me on my website, tarinaali.com, which will also lead you to where we are in these social media streets in this day and age. And yes, many things may come up for me just the same, but pray our strength in the Lord as we continue to grow and to blossom to be the best human beings that we possibly can be. And that hopefully in the days and the weeks and the months to come, that something you heard today in this conversation will bubble over into your soul. Until next time, we will see you all here on another episode of Suds Cafe. Thank you all for being here.